Victoria had always believed that money couldn't buy love, but lately, it seemed like money was the only thing attracting men to her. At 32, she was one of the most famous piano players in the country. Her concerts sold out in minutes, and her albums topped the classical music charts. But success had come with a price she never expected to pay. Tonight was supposed to be different. The charity gala at Whitmore Concert Hall was for a good cause, raising money for music education in schools. Victoria wore her favorite black evening dress and tried to smile as she mingled with the wealthy donors. But within minutes, she found herself surrounded by the same type of men who always approached her at these events. "Victoria, darling, you look absolutely stunning tonight," said Bradley Morrison, stepping closer than necessary. He was a tech company owner who had made millions selling apps. His expensive cologne was so strong it made her want to step back. "I've been thinking we should collaborate on something. I play piano too, you know." Victoria tried not to roll her eyes. She had heard this line so many times before. Rich men, who took a few piano lessons as children, always seemed to think they could impress her with their musical talents. "Oh, really?" she replied politely, though her voice carried a hint of tiredness. "How wonderful." "Yes, I'm quite good, actually," Bradley continued, puffing out his chest. "I learned from the best teachers money could buy. Maybe we could play together sometime. I bet we'd make beautiful music together, if you know what I mean." He winked at her, clearly pleased with his own cleverness. Around them, other men nodded and laughed, each waiting for their turn to impress the famous pianist. There was Robert Chen, a banker who claimed he could tickle the ivories just as well as he could count money. Next to him stood Antonio Rodriguez, a real estate developer who insisted he had natural rhythm and could make any piano sing. Victoria felt a familiar weight settling on her chest. These men didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a prize to be won, a trophy that would look good on their arm at social events. None of them had ever asked her about her music, her passion, or what truly mattered to her. They only cared about what she could do for their image. "You know what, gentlemen?" Victoria said suddenly, her voice cutting through their chatter. The group fell silent, surprised by the sharp edge in her tone. "I'm tired of empty promises and big talk." She walked over to the grand piano that sat on the small stage at one end of the ballroom. Her heels clicked on the marble floor as conversations around the room began to quiet down. People sensed something interesting was about to happen. Victoria placed her hand on the smooth black surface of the piano and turned to face the crowd. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt a strange sense of freedom building inside her. She was tired of playing games, tired of pretending to be interested in men who only saw dollar signs when they looked at her. "I'll tell you what," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I've heard enough talk about musical talent tonight. So here's my challenge." The entire ballroom had gone quiet now. Even the waiters stopped moving as they sensed the drama unfolding. "Whoever can truly move me with their playing," Victoria continued. "Whoever can touch my heart through music, I'll marry them. Right here, right now. I'm serious." A shocked silence fell over the room for a moment. Then nervous laughter began to ripple through the crowd. People weren't sure if she was joking or if the famous pianist had finally cracked under the pressure of her celebrity life. Bradley stepped forward, his face lit up with excitement and greed. "You can't be serious, Victoria. But if you are, I accept your challenge. I've been playing since I was 5 years old." "As have I," said Robert, pushing forward. "My piano teacher said I had natural talent." Soon several men were volunteering, each convinced they could win the hand of the wealthy and famous pianist. They saw it as a game, a fun challenge with an incredible prize at the end. But Victoria wasn't joking. As she looked at their eager faces, she felt a deep sadness wash over her. These men were already planning what they would gain from marrying her. None of them seemed to understand that she was looking for something real, something that couldn't be bought or faked. What Victoria didn't notice was the quiet figure in the corner of the room. Miguel Santos had been working his way around the ballroom, emptying trash cans and replacing table linens. At 45, he had been the night janitor at Whitmore Concert Hall for 3 years. His dark hair was streaked with early gray, and his gentle brown eyes held a sadness that few people ever noticed. Miguel understood English perfectly, though he still spoke with the accent of his native Colombia. He had heard every word of Victoria's challenge, and something about the pain in her voice made his heart ache. He had been watching her perform at the concert hall for years, always from a distance, always invisible. As the wealthy men continued to argue about who would play first, Miguel quietly finished his work and slipped into the hallway. He had cleaning to do in the practice rooms, and he knew it was better to stay out of the way when the rich people were having their parties. But as he walked down the corridor, pushing his cart of cleaning supplies, Miguel couldn't stop thinking about the beautiful pianist and the loneliness he had heard in her voice. He knew something about loneliness. He knew something about dreams that seemed impossible to reach, and he knew something else that none of those wealthy men knew. He knew what it really meant to make music that could touch someone's heart. The charity gala continued in the ballroom, with Victoria watching as man after man approached the piano. Each one played with technical skill but no soul. Each performance felt like a business presentation rather than music. As the evening wore on, Victoria's challenge began to feel like a mistake. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone would surprise her. Someone would play music that spoke to her heart instead of her bank account. But as the last volunteer finished his performance, Victoria realized she was still alone. The crowd began to disperse, disappointed that no one had won the famous pianist's hand. Victoria stood by the piano, feeling more isolated than ever. She had made a public spectacle of herself, and for what? To prove that she was right about men only wanting her money? As the ballroom emptied, Victoria sat down at the piano bench. Her fingers found the keys automatically, and she began to play a slow, sad melody that reflected exactly how she felt. The music filled the empty space, echoing off the high ceilings and marble walls. She didn't know that in the hallway outside, Miguel had stopped his work to listen. He stood perfectly still, his hands gripping the handle of his cleaning cart. As Victoria's music washed over him, he could hear her pain, her longing, her desperate hope for something real in a world full of fake promises. For the first time in 3 years, Miguel felt the urge to walk into that ballroom and sit down at the piano beside her. Not to win a challenge or claim a prize, but simply to let her know that someone understood the language she was speaking through her music. But he didn't move. He was just the janitor, and she was Victoria Sterling, the famous pianist. They lived in different worlds, and he knew better than to cross that line, or so he thought. 3 weeks had passed since the charity gala, and Victoria couldn't shake the feeling that she had made a fool of herself. The local newspapers had picked up the story, calling it everything from the pianist's desperate proposal to Victoria Sterling's $1 million challenge. She tried to ignore the headlines, but they followed her everywhere. Tonight, like many nights recently, Victoria found herself alone at Whitmore Concert Hall, long after her official practice time had ended. The building was quiet except for the soft echo of her footsteps as she made her way to the main stage. Playing here after hours had become her escape from the outside world and all its judgments. She settled at the grand piano and let her fingers drift across the keys. The melody that came out was soft and melancholy, matching her mood perfectly. She played without sheet music, letting her emotions guide her hands. This was when she felt most like herself, when there was no audience to impress, no critics to please, just her and the music. As she played, Victoria became lost in the sound. The notes seemed to float up to the high ceiling and wrap around her like a warm blanket. She didn't notice the soft sound of footsteps in the auditorium behind her, or the quiet rustle of someone moving carefully between the rows of seats. Miguel had been working his night shift for about an hour when he heard the piano music coming from the main hall. This wasn't unusual. Victoria often stayed late to practice, and he had grown accustomed to the sound of her playing during his work. What was unusual was the way she was playing tonight. There was something different in the music, something that made him stop his cleaning and just listen. He found himself walking toward the auditorium, drawn by the haunting melody. When he reached the doorway, he could see Victoria silhouetted against the stage lights, completely absorbed in her playing. Miguel knew he should continue with his work, but something about the scene held him frozen in place. The music she was playing told a story of loneliness and longing. Miguel understood that story better than most people would. He had left everything behind in Colombia 15 years ago, following a promise of a better life in America. But dreams had a way of changing when reality set in. The conservatory degree, that had been his pride and joy, meant nothing here. His years of training, his natural talent, his deep love of music, none of it mattered when bills needed to be paid and family needed to be supported. So Miguel had taken whatever work he could find, first in restaurants, then in hotels, and finally here at the concert hall. It was honest work, and he was grateful for it. But sometimes when he heard beautiful music like this, his heart ached for the life he had once imagined for himself. Victoria finished the piece and sat quietly for a moment, her hands resting on the keys. In the silence that followed, she heard a soft sound behind her. She turned around and saw Miguel standing near the back of the auditorium, a cleaning cloth in his hand, and an expression of deep appreciation on his face. "I'm sorry," Miguel said, quickly, his accent thick with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to disturb you, the music was so beautiful." Victoria was surprised. In all her years of performing, people usually commented on her technique or her fame. But this man, this janitor she had seen around the building but never really noticed, was talking about the beauty of her music. "You weren't disturbing me," she said, standing up from the piano bench. "I didn't know anyone was listening." Miguel shifted uncomfortably, clearly feeling like he had overstepped some invisible boundary. "I should go back to my work. I just wanted to say, what you played just now, it was very moving." There was something about the way he said it that made Victoria curious. His English was careful and formal, but his understanding of the music seemed genuine and deep. "Do you know much about music?" she asked, walking down from the stage toward where he stood. Miguel hesitated. He had learned long ago that it was better to keep his background to himself. People either didn't believe him or they felt sorry for him, and both reactions made him uncomfortable. "A little," he said finally. "In my country, before I came here, I studied music." "What instrument?" Victoria asked, genuinely interested now. "Piano," Miguel admitted quietly. Victoria felt a spark of real interest for the first time in weeks. "Would you like to hear me play something else?" Miguel's face lit up with an expression of pure joy that was impossible to fake. "If it wouldn't be too much trouble, yes, I would like that very much." Victoria returned to the piano and began to play one of her favorite pieces, a complex Chopin nocturne that required both technical skill and emotional depth. As she played, she found herself paying attention to Miguel's reactions. Unlike the men at the gala who had watched her with calculating eyes, Miguel listened with his whole being. She could see him following the melody, understanding the subtle changes in tempo and dynamics. When she finished, Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "That was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major," he said finally. "But the way you played the middle section, with that slight hesitation before the return to the main theme, it reminded me of how my teacher used to play it." He said the pause was like taking a breath before diving back into a beautiful memory. Victoria stared at him in amazement. That interpretation was exactly what she had been trying to achieve, but no critic or fellow musician had ever picked up on it. "Your teacher sounds like he was very wise," she said. Miguel smiled sadly. "He was. Professor Martinez taught at the National Conservatory in Bogota for 40 years. He said music wasn't about playing the right notes, it was about telling the truth with your heart." "What happened?" Victoria asked gently. "Why did you leave music?" The question hung in the air between them. Miguel looked down at the cleaning cloth in his hands as if suddenly remembering who he was and where he was. "Life happened," he said simply. "My father got sick and we needed money for his treatment. My mother was taking care of him and my younger sister was still in school. I was the oldest, so I came here to work and send money home. But that was 15 years ago," Victoria said. "Surely things are different now?" Miguel shrugged. "My father passed away 8 years ago. My sister finished university and became a nurse. My mother is comfortable now, but by then I was too old to start over again. And besides, this is good work." Honest work. Victoria heard the resignation in his voice, but also something else. Despite everything he had given up, there was no bitterness in Miguel's tone. He spoke about his sacrifice as if it had been the natural thing to do, the only choice that mattered. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Playing, I mean." Miguel looked up at the piano, and for a moment his careful composure slipped. Victoria saw a flash of deep longing cross his face. "Every day," he whispered. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood the power of music to heal and to hurt. "I should let you get back to your practice," Miguel said finally, stepping back toward the aisle. "Wait," Victoria called out impulsively. Would you like to hear me play again tomorrow night? I mean, if you're working and you have time?" Miguel stopped and turned back to her, his eyes wide with surprise. "You would want me to listen?" "Yes," Victoria said, and she realized she meant it more than she had meant anything in a long time. "I would like that very much." As Miguel walked back to his cleaning cart, pushing it quietly down the hallway, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since he had arrived in America, someone had asked him about music not as a curiosity or a pity, but as an equal. Someone had seen past his uniform and his accent and had recognized the musician that still lived inside him. And, for Victoria, sitting alone at the piano after Miguel had gone, the emptiness of the concert hall felt different somehow. Less lonely. She found herself looking forward to tomorrow night, not because she would get to perform, but because someone would be listening who truly understood what she was trying to say through her music. Neither of them realized it yet, but something had begun that night. Something that would change both of their lives in ways they never could have imagined. The next evening, Victoria arrived at the concert hall earlier than usual. She told herself it was because she wanted extra practice time, but the truth was that she was looking forward to seeing Miguel again. Their conversation the night before had been the most genuine interaction she'd had with anyone in months. She practiced her regular repertoire for about an hour, but her heart wasn't really in it. Every few minutes she found herself glancing toward the back of the auditorium, hoping to see Miguel's familiar figure. When he finally appeared around 9 o'clock, quietly going about his cleaning duties, Victoria felt a little flutter of excitement in her chest. "Good evening," she called out softly when she saw him. Miguel looked up from organizing the programs left scattered on the seats and smiled. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. How is your practice going tonight? Please, call me Victoria," she said, standing up from the piano. "And it's going well, thank you. I was wondering, would you like to sit and listen for a while? I mean, if you have time in your work schedule." Miguel glanced around the empty auditorium as if checking to make sure no one else was watching. "Are you sure? I don't want to get in trouble with my supervisor." "You won't get in trouble," Victoria assured him. "I'll make sure of that." So Miguel found himself sitting in the front row, his cleaning supplies set aside, while one of the world's most famous pianists played just for him. It felt surreal, like something out of a dream he might have had years ago as a struggling music student. Victoria played several pieces that night, and after each one, Miguel offered thoughtful comments that revealed his deep understanding of music theory and composition. They talked about different interpretations of classical pieces, about the emotions behind certain composers' works, and about the technical challenges of particularly difficult passages. "You know," Victoria said, "during a break between pieces, you talk about music like someone who has studied it seriously for years." Miguel looked uncomfortable again. "I told you I studied a little in Colombia." "A little?" Victoria pressed gently. "Miguel, the things you're saying, these aren't beginner observations. You're talking like someone who really knows what they're doing." Miguel was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. Finally, he spoke. "I was 3 years away from graduating with my master's degree when I left," he admitted. "I had been accepted to study with Professor Martinez, who was considered one of the best piano teachers in South America. I was going to be a concert pianist like you." Victoria felt her breath catch. 3 years away from your master's degree? Miguel, that's incredible. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't matter anymore." Miguel said with a sad smile. That was a different life, a different person. I'm a janitor now, and that's okay. I've made peace with it. But Victoria could see that he hadn't really made peace with it at all. She could see the pain in his eyes when he talked about his abandoned dreams, the way his hands moved unconsciously as if they were remembering the feel of piano keys. Would you play something for me? She asked suddenly. Miguel's head shot up in surprise. What? Would you play the piano? I'd love to hear you. Oh no, Miguel said quickly, standing up from his seat. I couldn't. It's been too long, and besides, this is your time. I'm just here to listen. Miguel, Victoria said firmly, I'm asking you as a friend. Please. I really want to hear you play. The word friend seemed to surprise Miguel. He looked at Victoria for a long moment as if trying to decide whether she really meant it, or if this was some kind of test. I probably won't be very good, he said finally. It's been 15 years since I played seriously. I don't care about good or bad, Victoria said. I just want to hear what music sounds like when you play it. Slowly, hesitantly, Miguel walked up onto the stage. He stood beside the piano bench for a moment, just looking at the keys. Then he sat down and placed his hands in position. What happened next took Victoria's breath away. Miguel began to play a piece she recognized as Bach's Goldberg Variations, but his interpretation was unlike anything she had ever heard. His technique was not quite as polished as it probably once had been, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the soul he poured into every note. The music that came from the piano was filled with longing, with loss, with beauty that had been buried but never forgotten. Victoria could hear his story in the way he played. The dreams he had given up, the sacrifices he had made, the quiet dignity with which he had faced disappointment. But she could also hear something else. Hope. Despite everything, the music still lived inside him. When Miguel finished, the silence in the auditorium was profound. Victoria realized she had tears running down her cheeks. Miguel, she whispered, that was extraordinary. Miguel looked up at her with a mixture of joy and pain on his face. I had forgotten, he said quietly. I had forgotten how it felt, how what felt. To tell the truth through music, Miguel said, echoing his old teacher's words. To let everything inside come out through your fingers. Victoria walked up to the piano and sat beside him on the bench. You can't give this up, she said urgently. Miguel, you have a gift, a real gift. It's too late for that, Miguel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Says who? Victoria challenged. Who made that rule? You're 45, not 90. People start new careers all the time. People with money start new careers, Miguel said gently. People with connections. People like you. Not people like me. Victoria felt a surge of frustration, not at Miguel but at the unfairness of a world that could waste such talent. What if I could help? She said impulsively. What if we could find a way? Miguel turned to look at her, and for the first time, since she had known him, she saw a flicker of real hope in his eyes. You would do that? But why? Victoria thought about the question seriously. Why did she want to help this man she barely knew? Was it just because he was talented? Or was it something more? Because, she said finally, in all my years of playing music, I've never heard anyone play with as much honesty as you just did. And because I think you might be the first person I've met who understands music the same way I do. They sat together at the piano bench in comfortable silence, both of them thinking about possibilities and complications, about dreams deferred, and dreams that might still come true. Would you play something with me? Victoria asked after a while. Something simple just for fun? Miguel nodded, and Victoria began a gentle melody in the key of G major. After a few measures, Miguel joined in with a complementary harmony. Their hands moved across the keyboard, sometimes together, sometimes in counterpoint, creating something beautiful and spontaneous. As they played, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. She felt connected to the music in a way that went beyond technical perfection or audience approval. She felt like she was having a conversation, like she and Miguel were speaking the same language fluently for the first time. When they finished the impromptu duet, they both sat quietly, their hands still resting on the keys. "Victoria," Miguel said softly, "thank you for tonight, for letting me remember who I used to be." "Miguel," Victoria replied, "I think you're still that person. I think you've always been that person." As Miguel gathered his cleaning supplies and prepared to finish his shift, Victoria remained at the piano. But she wasn't alone anymore, not really. For the first time in years, she felt like she had found someone who truly understood her. What she didn't realize yet was that she was falling in love. Not with Miguel's talent, though that was extraordinary. Not with his story, though it moved her deeply. She was falling in love with the man himself, with his kindness, his dignity, his quiet strength, and the way he saw beauty in the world despite everything he had lost. And Miguel, walking down the empty hallways of the concert hall, was experiencing something similar. For 15 years, he had convinced himself that he was content with his simple life. But tonight, sitting at that piano with Victoria, he had remembered what it felt like to dream again. Neither of them knew that their late-night musical conversations were about to change everything. But deep down, both of them could feel that something important was beginning, something that went far beyond music and into the realm of the heart. Over the next 2 months, Victoria and Miguel's evening meetings became a cherished routine. Every night after the concert hall emptied, they would find each other in the auditorium. Sometimes Victoria would play while Miguel listened, offering insights that helped her see familiar pieces in new ways. Other times she would convince Miguel to play, and she would sit mesmerized by his ability to transform simple melodies into profound emotional experiences. But it was when they played together that something truly magical happened. Their musical conversations grew more intimate and complex with each passing evening. They developed an almost telepathic understanding at the piano, able to anticipate each other's musical choices and respond in perfect harmony. "You know," Victoria said one evening as they finished playing a duet arrangement of a Brahms intermezzo, "I've never been able to do this with anyone before." "Do what?" Miguel asked, turning to face her on the piano bench they now shared comfortably. "Play, like this. Without planning, without sheet music, just responding to each other. It's like we're having a conversation that doesn't need words." Miguel smiled, his eyes warm in the soft stage lighting. "My teacher used to say that the best chamber music happens when musicians stop trying to impress each other and start trying to understand each other." "Is that what we're doing?" Victoria asked softly. "Understanding each other?" Miguel's expression grew serious. "I think so. I hope so." Over these weeks, they had shared much more than music. Victoria had told Miguel about the loneliness of fame, about how success had somehow made her feel more isolated than ever. She talked about the pressure to always be perfect, to always smile, to always be grateful for opportunities that felt more like golden cages. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had chosen a different path," she confided one night. "If I had stayed teaching music to children instead of pursuing the concert circuit." "Do you regret it?" Miguel asked. Victoria considered the question carefully. "I regret what it cost me. I regret that I stopped playing for joy and started playing for approval. I regret that I became someone I'm not sure I like very much." "But you're not that person now," Miguel said gently. "Not when you're here, playing. Like this. This is who you really are." Miguel, in turn, had opened up about his life in ways he never had with anyone else. He told Victoria about his family in Colombia, about the phone calls with his mother every Sunday, about the money he still sent home even though it was no longer desperately needed. "She wants me to come back," he said one evening. "My mother. She says I've done enough, that I should come home and live for myself now." "Why don't you?" Victoria asked. Miguel was quiet for a long moment. "Because I'm afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that I've been away from music for so long that I wouldn't be able to find my way back. Afraid that I'm too old to start over. Afraid that I might fail." "Miguel," Victoria said firmly, "you could never fail, not with a gift like yours. And you, Miguel replied. Could never be anyone other than exactly who you're meant to be. You just forgot for a while. Their conversations revealed shared values, similar struggles, and a growing affection that neither of them had expected. Victoria found herself looking forward to these evenings more than her actual concerts. Miguel began staying later than necessary, finding extra tasks to do around the concert hall so he could spend more time with Victoria. But their growing friendship was not going unnoticed. Victoria, darling, people are talking, said her manager Patricia Hoffman during a meeting in Victoria's dressing room after a Friday night performance. Patricia was a sharp woman in her 50s who had guided Victoria's career for over a decade. She usually focused on bookings and publicity, not personal matters, so her concern was unusual. Talking about what? Victoria asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew. About you and the janitor. The night cleaning staff has mentioned seeing you two together after hours. Some of the donors who use the practice rooms in the evening have noticed too. Victoria felt her cheeks flush with anger. His name is Miguel, and we're friends. There's nothing wrong with friendship. Of course not, Patricia said smoothly. But appearances matter in your position. You're Victoria Sterling. You can't be seen fraternizing with the help. It's not appropriate for your image. My image? Victoria's voice rose. Patricia, Miguel, is one of the most talented musicians I've ever met. He has more musical knowledge and sensitivity than half the people on the classical music circuit. I'm sure he's very nice, Patricia said dismissively. But that's not the point. The point is that you have a reputation to maintain. Donors don't want to see their favorite pianist getting cozy with the cleaning staff. It makes them uncomfortable. Then maybe they need to examine why it makes them uncomfortable, Victoria snapped. Patricia sighed. Victoria, I'm trying to protect your career. You've worked too hard to get where you are to throw it all away for some infatuation. This isn't an infatuation, Victoria said quietly. Miguel is my friend, a real friend. Maybe the first real friend I've had in years. Then perhaps you need to consider whether this friendship is worth risking everything you've built. Meanwhile, Miguel was facing pressure of his own. His supervisor, Frank Rodriguez, had called him into the office earlier that week. Miguel, you're a good worker, Frank had said. Never had any problems with you in 3 years, but I need to ask you about something. Of course, Mr. Rodriguez. What is it? Some people have mentioned that you've been spending time with Miss Sterling, after hours. Now, I'm not saying you've done anything wrong, but I need to make sure you understand the boundaries here. Miguel felt his stomach drop. We just talk about music sometimes. I would never do anything inappropriate. I believe you, Frank said. But here's the thing. People like Miss Sterling, they live in a different world than people like us. And when worlds cross like that, it usually doesn't end well for people like us. What are you saying? I'm saying be careful, Miguel. Don't get ideas above your station. Don't mistake kindness for something more. And don't put me in a position where I have to choose between keeping a good employee and keeping our important clients happy. The message was clear, even if it wasn't said directly. Miguel understood that his job was in jeopardy if his friendship with Victoria continued to attract attention. That night, when Victoria arrived for their usual evening together, she could sense that something was wrong. Miguel seemed distant, distracted, and when they played together, his usual emotional openness was replaced by careful restraint. Miguel, what's wrong? Victoria asked after they finished a half-hearted attempt at a Mozart sonata. Miguel looked down at his hands on the keyboard. Maybe we should stop meeting like this. What? Why? Because people are starting to talk, because it's causing problems for both of us. Victoria felt a surge of panic. I don't care what people say. But I care what happens to your career, Miguel said, finally looking at her. And I care about keeping my job. I have responsibilities, Victoria. I can't afford to lose this position. Then we'll be more careful, Victoria said desperately. We'll meet somewhere else or we'll… Victoria, Miguel interrupted gently. Look at us, really look at us. You're one of the most famous musicians in the country. I'm a janitor. This, whatever this is, It can't work. Why not? Victoria demanded. Because of what other people think? Because of money? Because of stupid social rules that don't mean anything? Because those stupid social rules are reality, Miguel said sadly. And reality doesn't care what we want. They sat in silence for several minutes, both of them struggling with emotions they weren't quite ready to name. I don't want to stop seeing you, Victoria whispered finally. I don't want to stop either, Miguel admitted. But I don't see how we can continue. Victoria stood up from the piano bench, her mind racing. Miguel, what if there was a way? What if I could help you get back into music professionally? What if you didn't have to be just a janitor anymore? Miguel shook his head. Victoria, that's a beautiful dream, but it's not just a dream, Victoria interrupted. I have connections. I know people who could help. Teachers, agents, maybe even performance opportunities. You're good enough, Miguel. You're better than good enough. For a moment, Miguel allowed himself to hope. But then reality crashed back down on him. And what then? He asked. Even if that worked, even if somehow I could build a music career again, where would that leave us? You'd still be Victoria Sterling, the famous pianist. I'd still be Miguel Santos, the middle-aged janitor trying to restart his life. The gap between us would still be there. Maybe the gap isn't as big as you think, Victoria said softly. Miguel looked at her with an expression of such tenderness that Victoria felt her heart skip a beat. Maybe it isn't, he said quietly. But the world thinks it is. And sometimes, the world's opinion matters whether we want it to or not. They both knew they were talking about more than just friendship now. They were talking about feelings that had been growing stronger every evening they spent together. They were talking about the possibility of something that seemed impossible. What do we do? Victoria asked. I don't know, Miguel said honestly. I just know that I care about you too much to see you hurt because of me. 6 months had passed since Victoria's impulsive challenge at the first charity gala, and tonight the Whitmore Concert Hall was hosting another fundraising event. This time, it was for the Metropolitan Children's Hospital, and Victoria had agreed to perform as the headline act. The ballroom was filled with the same wealthy donors, the same expensive gowns and tuxedos, the same air of privilege and self-importance. But Victoria felt different now. The lonely, cynical woman who had stood at this same piano half a year ago was gone, replaced by someone who had learned what it meant to connect with another person through music and genuine friendship. She and Miguel had continued their evening meetings despite the pressure from both their professional worlds. They had been more careful, more discreet, but neither of them had been willing to give up what they had found together. Their musical collaborations had grown even more beautiful and complex, and their friendship had deepened into something that both of them were beginning to recognize as love. Tonight, as Victoria performed her planned pieces for the gala audience, she could see Miguel in the back of the room, quietly setting up for the reception that would follow her concert. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded space, and she felt the familiar flutter of happiness that his presence always brought her. After her performance, Victoria was immediately surrounded by the usual group of admirers and potential suitors. But now their compliments and flirtations felt hollow, compared to the thoughtful conversations she shared with Miguel about music and life. Absolutely breathtaking, as always, said Dr. Jonathan Wells, a prominent surgeon who had been pursuing Victoria for months. Your interpretation of that Rachmaninoff piece was simply divine. Thank you, Victoria replied politely, though she noticed he had gotten the composer wrong. It had been Chopin, not Rachmaninoff. You know, Dr. Wells continued, moving closer. I've been thinking about your famous challenge from the last gala. The one about playing to win your heart? I've been taking piano lessons, actually. Perhaps you'd like to hear what I've learned? Before Victoria could respond, other men began to join the conversation, each claiming they had improved their musical skills in hopes of impressing her. Soon she was surrounded by a familiar crowd of wealthy suitors, all competing for her attention. Gentlemen, said Bradley Morrison, pushing his way to the front of the group. He had been particularly persistent since the first gala, convinced that he had the best chance of winning Victoria's challenge. "I think we all remember Miss Sterling's proposition. She said she would marry whoever could truly move her with their playing." "That's right," agreed Robert Chen, the banker. "And I, for one, have been practicing diligently. I think you'll find my rendition of Für Elise quite impressive." Victoria felt a familiar sense of dismay as she listened to these men discuss her, challenge as if it were a business deal or a game to be won. None of them seemed to understand that she had been looking for something real, something that couldn't be bought or practiced or performed for effect. "Very well," she said finally, raising her voice to quiet the group. "If you're all so confident in your abilities, let's settle this once and for all." The crowd that had gathered around them began to buzz with excitement. Word spread quickly through the ballroom that Victoria Sterling was about to honor her famous challenge. One by one, the men approached the piano. Dr. Wells played a technically correct but soulless version of a Bach invention. Bradley Morrison attempted a flashy Liszt piece that he had clearly memorized without understanding. Robert Chen's Für Elise was exactly as mundane as Victoria had expected. Each performance was met with polite applause from the audience, but Victoria felt nothing. These men were playing notes, not music. They were performing for approval, not expressing truth or emotion. As the last volunteer finished his piece, the crowd looked expectantly at Victoria. According to her challenge, she should choose one of these men to marry. But looking at their eager, calculating faces, Victoria felt the same despair she had experienced 6 months ago. "Well?" prompted Bradley Morrison. "Which one of us has won your heart, Victoria?" Victoria stood silent for a moment, her heart heavy with disappointment. She had hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone would surprise her. Someone would play with the kind of honesty and emotion that she craved. But once again, she was faced with men who saw her as a prize to be won, rather than a person to be understood. "I'm afraid," she began slowly, "that none of you have—" "Wait," called a voice from the back of the room. The crowd turned to see who had spoken. There, standing near the service entrance with a cleaning cart beside him, was Miguel. He looked terrified, but determined, like a man who had made a decision that scared him but felt necessary. "Excuse me," Miguel said, his accent thick with nervousness as he walked slowly toward the front of the room. "I would like to try." A murmur of confusion and amusement rippled through the crowd. Who was this janitor who thought he could compete with doctors and businessmen for the hand of the famous Victoria Sterling? "I'm sorry," Bradley Morrison said with a condescending laugh, "but I think there's been some misunderstanding. This is a private event for donors and guests." "Actually," Victoria said, her voice cutting clearly through the chatter, "the challenge was open to anyone who thought they could move me with their playing. Miguel works here at the concert hall. He has every right to participate." The crowd fell silent, unsure how to react to this unexpected turn of events. Victoria could see the disapproval on many faces, the barely concealed shock that she was allowing a janitor to interrupt their elegant evening. But Miguel was already walking toward the piano, his eyes fixed on Victoria's face. In them she could see fear and hope and love all mixed together. She realized that he was risking everything, his job, his dignity, his carefully maintained privacy, for her. Miguel reached the piano and stood beside it for a moment, looking out at the sea of confused and hostile faces. Then he looked at Victoria, and she nodded encouragingly. "I would like to play something I wrote," Miguel said quietly. "For Victoria." He sat down at the piano bench and placed his hands on the keys. For a moment he was still, gathering his courage and his thoughts. Then he began to play. The music that filled the ballroom was unlike anything the audience had ever heard. It was a piece that told a story, the story of a man who had given up his dreams for love of family, who had worked in silence for years while music lived quietly in his heart. It spoke of loneliness and sacrifice, of hopes deferred, but never entirely abandoned. But as the piece continued, it became something more. It became the story of two people finding each other across impossible circumstances. It told of evening conversations that turned into deep friendship, of musical collaborations that revealed kindred spirits, of the slow dawning of love that neither had expected but both had come to treasure. The melody wove together themes that Victoria recognized from their private duets, musical phrases that had become their secret language during those late-night hours in the empty concert hall. Miguel was playing their story, their connection, their love, for everyone to hear. As he played, the audience began to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. This wasn't just a performance, it was a declaration. The janitor they had dismissed was revealing himself to be a musician of profound talent and sensitivity. Victoria felt tears streaming down her face as she listened to Miguel pour his heart out through the piano keys. She could hear everything he was too shy to say in words: his love for her, his gratitude for their friendship, his hope that somehow they could find a way to be together despite all the obstacles between them. When Miguel finished, the silence in the ballroom was complete. No one moved. No one spoke. The power of what they had just heard had left everyone stunned. Finally, Victoria stepped forward. She walked to the piano where Miguel sat, his hands trembling slightly as they rested on the keys. "Miguel," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." She reached for his hand and helped him stand up. Then, in front of the entire crowd of wealthy donors and social elite, Victoria Sterling looked into the eyes of Miguel Santos and spoke the words she had been afraid to say for months. "I love you," she said simply. "And if your offer is real, if you're truly asking, then yes, I will marry you." The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs and gasps. Some people looked scandalized, others confused, and a few seemed genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. Miguel's eyes filled with tears as he took Victoria's hands in his. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "Are you absolutely sure? Because once we do this, there's no going back. People will talk. They'll say terrible things about both of us." "Let them talk," Victoria said firmly. "Miguel, I've spent my whole life trying to please other people, trying to live up to their expectations. For the first time, I want to choose something for myself. I want to choose love. I want to choose you." Miguel brought her hands to his lips and kissed them gently. "Then yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I am asking you to marry me. Not because of any challenge or game, but because I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person."